Welcome, everyone. I'm Pamela Welling, founder of the North Grenville Writers Circle. Today, I'm delighted to sit down with Beth Granger to discuss her memoir, Born and Raised. Surviving the Cult Was Only Half the Battle. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Pam. So good to talk to someone local.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you too. You've been very busy in the last little while since your book launched. I see you everywhere online. Um,
Yeah, it is busy. It's like a full-time job.
for sure. I'd like to start. Would you mind reading the book synopsis? And then after that, I'll do a quick endorsement.
I'd be happy to. This is one of many synopsises that are out there. What happens when religion and power collide in the wrong hands? At Grenville Christian College, once one of Canada's most prestigious private religious schools, the result was thousands of broken lives. Born and Raised recounts the author's gripping and deeply personal journey. Beth's life began at Grenville, where her parents were teachers. The picturesque campus on the banks of the St. Lawrence River masked a dark reality. Behind its idyllic facade lay a world of strict control, religious religious zealotry, and emotional abuse. As Beth uncovered the stories of others who suffered at Grenville, her voice became a rallying cry. She played a key role in one of the largest class action lawsuits in Canadian history, proving that collective resilience can triumph over systemic abuse. And I want to add just after that in case no one's heard of my book, it's not born and raised as you would imagine. It's born and raised, Razed, which makes a whole different meaning.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that
Mm,
ahead. There might be a little bit of triggers for readers that are listening to us. So just a warning, we're going to be talking, I don't know if you use the word high demand religion, but
yeah.
um, there's going to be some things that we're going to talk about. So I just want to talk about this endorsement is from Gilly Jenkinson, PhD. She's a UK accredited psychotherapist, international speaker, and the director of Hope Valley Counseling, which specializes in recovery from coercive, cultic, and spiritual abuse. She describes the book as beautifully written, searingly honest, and heart-rending. Beth, can you talk about what inspired you to write the memoir and
I
a little
can.
bit? Yeah, thanks.
I will. Uh, well, basically, I mean, to put it to the very shortest story is that it was a tremendous and important part of my personal healing. I had been seeing a therapist, a psychologist for over 14 years before I started writing. But it wasn't until I started writing the book that not only did I process trauma in a very deep, profound way, but I also was able to unlock memories that had been buried because I dissociated. I was at the cult for 30 years. And to get through all that, you do a lot of dissociation. So it became very apparent to me that writing was essential for my healing. And it wasn't long before I realized I needed to keep at it until I'd written the whole story, and I didn't know what I would do with the story. I just knew I had to keep writing. And as I wrote, it became also apparent to me that I wasn't just writing for myself, I was writing for so many other people who couldn't express what had happened to them because hundreds of students were damaged at Grenville, but our story extends to anyone who's experienced religious trauma, and there are way too many of people like that. And then, a lot of my own personal problems, like I haven't had an eating disorder through my whole life, and also I went through benzo withdrawal. So I just kept those kinds of people in mind as I wrote, and it just propelled me forward because it's not easy to write this kind of story.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, keep things secretive. And
Hmm.
so I think talking about it helps, it's not on the person who experienced this, it's on the people that promulgated the abuse. And especially there's people that you talked about that you learned about sexual and physical abuse that
Yeah.
you help tell the story for it helps them as well. That yes, this did
Yeah,
happen. It does matter, and we don't need to be hiding this kind of thing, eh? So I guess you feel like
exactly.
he was writing for you, but also to share that you can talk about it, right?
Yeah, I just knew how powerful it was for me to read other people's memoirs that I could relate to. And
Yeah,
I knew that I had a story that represented so many people's stories just at my school alone. And I
right.
knew that I had a story that could relate to so many people, and I was right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So can you talk a little bit about Grenville Christian College?
absolutely. So Grenville, I mean, most people have heard of it around here, but it was presented to the world as a elite, prestigious boarding school, one of Canada's best schools, um, and it was advertised to be an Anglican school, but in truth, it was a cult, just hiding in plain sight. It started in 1970, but then in 73, its leaders were looking for outside guidance because the school was in financial trouble. And they found two women who were running another community in Cape Cod called the Community of Jesus. And that community seemed to be thriving, very well disciplined. Everybody there seemed happy and engaged and committed. And our leaders quickly became convinced that those two women would be basically the saving leadership that we needed, and didn't really realize what they were getting into. And those women basically became the influence, the outside influence that, and they also became directors, like on paper, of our school. And so we became a satellite cult community, and all the staff at Grenville became members of that community of Jesus, like distanced members, if you will. They all had to right away make vows for life, lifetime vows of obedience, and you couldn't work at Grenville unless you were a vowed member of the community of Jesus. And we staff kids were pressured to stay for life as well. We were told that we were called, especially by God, to stay and help run the school. So on the outside, we looked like we were such a dynamic school, and everybody wanted to send their kids there. It looked like a fantastic place. And we also had patrons on our board who were from the highest levels of society and government. We had, three lieutenant governors, we had High Commissioner to Great Britain, we had senators, all these people in Canadian society who thought Grenville was amazing and they supported it, but they didn't know what was happening in truth. And it didn't, to make a long story short, I escaped in 2001. 6 years later, Grenville went bankrupt. And that is when people felt safe finally to come forward with their stories of abuse. And allegations of abuse just exploded in the media and online. And that is when we launched a lawsuit. So that kind of gives a lot, basically the backdrop.
Yeah. And so the class action lawsuit, I believe was in 2008.
Yes, we started like we put together the steering committee and we found the lawyers in 2007, just after the school closed, but we launched it in January of 2008.
Okay. And how long did it take to resolve?
16 years.
Wow.
I had no idea what we were getting into. Yeah.
Oh, can you talk a little bit about the findings?
Yes. So in 2008, the statement of claim was issued seeking damages for psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. And at the time, we named the defendants to be the Corporation of Grenville Christian College, the Anglican Diocese of Ontario, and the the two headmasters and their wives, because they were the spokespeople appointed in charge under the mothers who were the leaders of the Community of Jesus. So in the preceding years, it took us like 6 years to get the class action even certified, which was a
And that's
very,
the Ontario's Superior Court of Justice, if I'm not mistaken.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. So it was just such a slow process. We went through many depositions. I was a representative plaintiff. There were five of us for a class of 1,400, almost 1,400 members. And most class action lawsuits, over 90%, 90, over 95% never make it to trial in Canada. We became the first historical abuse case to go to trial. We went to trial in 2019, and then we became the first to win. And you know, long story short, um, we won. Then the other side appealed, so we had to go through a 2 year appeal process. And it wasn't until 2024 that we were able to reach a settlement for the actual damages. And we all had to make claims through a settlement process. And the final compensation is basically serving a symbolic function in acknowledging the harms that we class members endured. You know, some people's lives were completely broken by Grenville, and I don't think any amount of money can be properly established to help with that. But it really, like for most of us, our goal was just to be acknowledged, to be validated, to hopefully set some sort of precedent. And we accomplished all of that. So yeah, it
Yeah,
was a success.
very good. Yeah. And some people didn't make it along the way. You talked about some people.
Yeah, it's so sad.
Yeah.
We have death by suicide for several. Yeah.
So can you, I think one of the things that you talk about that happened both to the adults, to the kids, the staff kids, was these light sessions. Can you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, so when we talk about a cult, people say, "Oh yeah, like right, what do you mean a cult?" Cults are all about um coercive control and breaking people down, um basically hijacking their brains in a way. And one of the ways they did that, one of the largest ways they did that was this term, or this practice called light sessions. It was basically public humiliation ritual, if you will, where the mothers were really preoccupied about sin and always um, rooting out sin, accusing people of sin, telling us to be preoccupied constantly with repentance and focusing on everything that's wrong with us. And basically, um, they what was their main preaching? Death to self is the key. So the way they did that, one of the ways was these sessions where, we had to bring sin into the light, which is why it was called the light session. And these could be small group meetings where one person at a time was being uh, targeted and everybody else was attacking them verbally. Sometimes it was a physical attack, but mostly it was verbal. But sometimes the light sessions were full school assemblies where hundreds of people were gathered, and they could last all day long, or sometimes longer than a day. And I mean, in the book, I remember vividly one that started at 3 a.m. We were all called out of our beds to go down to the chapel. And they were just frightening because people were accused of sins that were not just real, they were also imagined. And, you could even get in trouble for sinning in your mind.
Mm,
Like, that was one of the things they would say. And or if you had a bad attitude that was undefined, or and also students were expected to stand up and publicly shame other students. So it wasn't just coming from the leaders. And so everyone lived in fear and paranoia. You never knew who would be next. And it was really frightening for those who were stood up, but it was just as frightening for those watching, you know? So yeah, it was a very systemic problem. Yeah.
And in the book, you wrote about like, you'd get in trouble if you ate too much. You'd get in trouble if you didn't eat enough. You'd
Yeah.
get in trouble for get your grades were too good, so therefore you were probably too proud of that, and then
Yeah.
so you weren't allowed to learn what your grades were. And yeah, those are
You
some
could not
that
win.
were,
You're right. You just
yeah.
couldn't win. And it was like, yeah, you just, you,
You tried to find the right medium, something
yeah.
that wouldn't hurt you too much, but was
Hmm.
strong enough to be accepted by
Yeah.
them. Is yeah.
And we were expected to perform and be excellent. Like, the school did enjoy a good reputation because we did get a good education, but and we also were performing in many ways, right from, not only sports, but drama and public speaking competitions and everything. We were expected to be top notch. But we were also the ones who were very talented were getting incredible amount of attacks for, like, they love to call me haughty, which was like egotistical or, full of myself. And I was so afraid to do well. I'm still like, it still scares me to do well. Like,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, that was just, you're right. You were damned if you do and damned if you don't, and you were walking on a tightrope most of the time. So
And
yeah.
you shared about how like your the adults, parents would be shamed in front of the children, which is incredibly
Yes.
harmful, I think.
Thank
And
you for bringing that up. I mean,
yeah.
from my earliest memories, my parents were being publicly shamed in front of me. And
And
you
you were
also
kept
brought up,
apart from them.
yes, and that was the other thing. Another coercive tactic they used was dismantling families. And by the age of 4, I was moved from my parents and not allowed to live with them. And on top of which, I'd watched them being shamed in light sessions repeatedly. And it became clear to me that it wasn't like it was a sin to love me. And th I knew they wouldn't be showing me their love because then that would mean they were more sinful. Yeah. So that's really messed up, you know?
Yeah. And then there's sometimes you were taken out of discipline where you couldn't go to
Mm.
school, and can you talk about some of the discipline?
Sure. Yeah. So with students, some of the biggest complaints they have were the light sessions, but another was being put on discipline. The disciplines there were draconian, and I'll try to describe the main kind of discipline that most students would encounter was being put on D, as we called it. And if you were found to be sinning or breaking rules, and by the way, a lot of the rules were not written, so kids would find themselves in trouble for, things like not turning someone in or someone else in, um, or having a bad attitude. Uh, so if they were in trouble for something like that, they'd be pulled out of school. They wouldn't be allowed to go to classes or do any of their schoolwork. They'd have to change out of the uniform. And so right away, it's obvious who's in trouble. But then they'd be given basically soul crushing hard labor from dawn till dusk, or maybe even to bedtime. And it was usually indefinite. So, they'd say, you're on D until you've changed, until we can tell that you've changed. And it was really demoralizing. And so that was discipline. But then there were so many other kinds of disciplines that they would impose that were always random and unpredictable. I've mentioned, well, you mentioned, I can't remember, what did you say? I don't know if you remember mention one, but I can give some other ones. Like, and they were usually trying to root out our sin. So, for example, when I was 5, I was put on a diet by the one of the main cult leaders, and she told me that my sin of gluttony had to be eradicated, and I was devastated. And I remember thinking, well, maybe if I lose weight, I'll get to live with my parents. And it became this unbearable pressure, which I've I've struggled with my whole life. And woven through the book is my attempts to fix my body and fix my eating. And it's just a terrible way to treat people, you know. But
Yeah,
and then oh yeah, you
is
sorry?
the example I remember, two of them, the swimsuit where
Yes.
you were accused it wasn't modest enough, but then when you wore it in front of them, it was okay, but that was ter humiliating. And then
Yeah.
being sent down to the States to live there because you weren't good enough, and then your mother was as well. So there's a lot of examples
Uh,
that come to my mind.
yeah. Yeah, it's just it just a constant barrage of well, a constant
Not
attempts to
going.
break you down, right? So, you know, as you said, in my teens, I wasn't allowed to see my grades, and that was really difficult for me. I was very academically oriented. Um, you know, once I confessed to being bulimic, I was around 17, and as a result, I lost my lead role in Gilbert and Sullivan, which was a huge deal to me. I dreamed of being on stage all growing up because we used to put on these incredible productions of Gilbert and Sullivan, and we would sell out, you know, at the Brockville Arts Center. Sometimes we would use the Brockville Arts Center as the venue. I mean, the place was sold out, and you know, we were well known for this sorts of things, and I lost my role because I told them I was, you know, I was
You had
having
a health,
bulimia.
you had a medical and a health issue,
Yeah.
and it was something that was held against you as being
Mm-hmm.
unethical, which you
Yeah.
probably caused in the first
Oh
place.
yeah, exactly. You just like you said, you couldn't win.
Yeah,
And you know, another time, I mean, I could go on. The book goes on and on about disciplines, but
yeah.
you know, another thing they used to do is, and this was really hard to understand, was anyone who seemed to be really getting good at something, um, they would pull them out before they could have an ego. So I know so many people who were pulled out of music once they got good at it, or pulled out of sports once they were really good. And you know, and so those were other disciplines that could happen. I mean, I even know students who were boarding students whose parents were paying thousands of dollars, who, for example, might be really good at the piano and were told, because of your bad attitude, you can't play the piano while you're here. You know, just things like that just blow your mind, you know? Um, so yeah, it was kind of like trying to eradicate people's sense of dignity and well, like their own sense of pride, you know?
Mhm.
So, yeah, those are just a few examples of disciplines. Um, and as you know, there's way more to it in the story in the
Yeah,
book.
yeah. So I'd like to maybe move on to about when you did decide to leave the community. Um, you'd been part of it for most of your life. Can you share what it was like when you begin to accept that you had grown up in a cult?
Yes. You know, the book, there's just one chapter where I cover my escape and my exit, and you know, I won't get into all that, but I left essentially not having a clue that Grenville was abusive. All I knew, and this was very rebellious, was that I was not happy and I couldn't see myself staying there any longer. And I knew that I just felt like a caged animal and I had to get out, even though that scared me because we'd been raised to think that if we left, we were going straight to hell. And I finally had to acknowledge that I was already living in a kind of hell. And if that was going to happen to me, then so be it. But I really pictured Grenville as this white flock and I was a black sheep. And I had to just accept that if I stayed, I would feel double-minded. Do you know what I mean? And I knew that that wasn't okay. So eventually I made my way into the scary outside world. And, you know, because I had been so abused, the outside world felt, at first it just felt kind of freeing and like I felt right away my email address was happy Gillis because I was like happy to be out of there. My maiden name was Gillis. But It wasn't long before I started having, and I developed, like, I was right away, I jumped into life on the outside. Got a teaching career right off the bat, found a man, got married, had two children. You know, it seemed like my life was just going very well, but cracks appeared immediately because I still had this raging eating disorder and I had so much trauma that I didn't know I had, you know.
You call
So
it you call it programming? Because I think in terms of programming,
yes, I was
there's
completely indoctrinated.
yeah.
And so to answer your question about the cult, what happened was I had just begun to get therapy. I had just actually gotten diagnosed with PTSD and bulimia the year before Grenville closed. And then when they closed, all my eyes opened because what happened was in the space of about 2 months, all kinds of survivors who had gone to Grenville, students who had been there, started gathering on this website called FactNet. And what it was a website, this was before Facebook, where cult survivors could gather and post anonymously about their trauma. So it was safe, but what we were doing, and they also had like you could find your cult on the website. So there was a when people started finding out that people were posting about Grenville Christian College and the community of Jesus, thousands and thousands of posts were flooding the site that summer. And I happened to be on maternity leave that year and had a little extra time. And I got sucked into reading it, and my mind was blown because I had not understood that students had been damaged there. I hadn't understood fully that I had been damaged. I was starting to come to an understanding that there was a lot going on that I had to heal from, but I barely understood it until that summer. And it didn't take me long, not only to read some of that, what was going on there, but I then started researching cults and found out that we checked off all the boxes of what a typical cult would be. And it it just haunted me that so many students had been harmed. And also quickly I realized that the school was not prepared to take accountability. In fact, right away, we got into like the newspapers were starting to post these kinds of stories. And when I saw the final headmaster quote was quoted as saying there was no truth to the allegations of abuse, I right away, like it was like a defining moment. I thought, okay, that's not okay. He knows that he's not like I knew he was lying. And I just decided I had to do something about it. So that was my awakening that summer. And like I said, it only took us a few months to find lawyers and start the class action. And we, within about 4 months, had presented served the, what is it called? You serve the class action in court. I think that's
Yeah,
when it was.
yeah,
Statement of claim was issued. Yeah.
kind of thing, yeah. Wow, so being on maternity leave gave you the time. I mean, you had
Yeah.
yeah,
It's incredible. I
yeah,
mean, not that you have much time. It was my second child, but it
yeah,
was more time than I normally would have had if I had been teaching. So yeah. It was just like I think it was meant to be.
yeah. Did you have any fears when you first left about some of the connections? I mean,
Oh,
family
yes.
members and
Well,
all
I
that.
had seen people being shunned prior to when I left. Everyone who left was shunned, including my own brother. So I was really scared of that. So when I left, I tried to keep good communication, good ties. I would go back and visit, at least a few times a year. And I wanted to feel like everyone there who's still there still liked me and still, cared about how I was doing. So when I decided to join the lawsuit, I knew I had a suspicion that I would lose all ties, like I would be cutting ties with all those people. And it was very clear, like I was right. In fact, I don't, I basically have no friendship with almost 99% of the staff. And there were well over 100 staff members there. and many of whom were my age or younger because they grew up with me. So that's been very painful. But I had to realize what the truth was that as friendly as we seemed to be, Grenville and the Community of Jesus coercive tactics had actually broken any possible bonds that we really had long ago because we were trained to be in light sessions attacking each other for our sins. So you never felt really close to anyone. And so it was a kind of surface friendships. Do you know what I mean? And I had to realize that I wasn't really losing real friends. You know what I mean?
And
But
I
but it
assume,
was hard because I did that they were the only people I knew. And it was really hard to start over in my 30s out in the wide world, it was hard to trust people.
what about the community that you met on the website and that you've gone through something similar with? Are there still
Yeah, so
connections?
so those people that because I became a representative plaintiff, I gained a purpose and I gained connections with everyone in the lawsuit who who took part in it and who believed in it and helped push it through. So yes, that was a way of kind of building my own community. Yeah.
So I just want to talk about the dedication and one of the Shakespeare quotes that you have in your book. The dedication of your book reads, "For everyone whose life was raised in the name of God." And in
Mm.
part one, you quote William Shakespeare from The Merchant of Venice, writing, "The devil can cite scripture for his purpose." Can you talk about what the dedication and quote mean to you?
Sure. Well, I wanted the book to be, as I wrote the book, and I think I've alluded to, I felt the book was not just my story, it was for so many other people. I'm sorry, my dog. Can you hear
Oh,
my
that's
dog?
my dog, I think, isn't it?
Mine. She's
Okay.
barking. Is
Mine's
it
barking
okay?
at the front. I can't hear yours because I
Oh,
can.
good. Okay. So anyway, anyone who's like, born and raised is the title because, like I said, they were trying to break us down and and I feel there's a danger in religion when it's weaponized. And it was definitely weaponized at Grenville and in the Community of Jesus. And we're not exclusive to that. It was, the residential schools, they used religion to weaponize against the indigenous children who were sent there. And, there are so many high control religions where people's lives are really damaged because religion is used against them in some way. So that's why I just simply put for everyone whose life was raised, Razed, because I happen to know far too many people who are going through recovery from that. And it felt like the best way to, I thought of doing a dedication to my brother, who's one of the most stark examples of this because my youngest brother was born at Grenville and he has his life if anyone's life has been raised it's his he lives on the streets or in jail or in the psych ward basically bouncing from one to the other and it's just heartbreaking how he's ended up and he's not alone. So yeah, I was thinking of him when I wrote it, but also for anyone whose life has been
Yeah.
damaged in that way. And as far as the William Shakespeare quote, I just thought it was perfect because in my book I talk about how much Shakespeare meant to me especially as a teacher. And I just love that quote because it's again weaponizing religion. If the devil is citing scripture for his purpose, I just pictured the leaders as they would use scripture against people. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I mean, mainstream religion, high demand religions, not mainstream religions, have can be destructive in some
Yes.
ways. Um, can you talk about some people that may have helped along the way in the
Oh
health
yeah. I
mental
I
loss?
mean, when I think of my path, just even the recovery. I have to huge shout out to my psychologist. I met her in 2006, and she is in many ways has parented me, where I didn't get parented. To this day, I still rely on her advice, and I am so grateful for the fact that I had access to a psychologist. One of the reasons I wanted to fight for the lawsuit was that, if we could get access to any compensation, I was hoping that people who couldn't afford therapy in our law in our class would get access to some, at least, some, what I mean? Because it's
Mm,
so expensive, and so many people can't afford it. So shout out to her. And then we had really great lawyers, two of whom are now judges at the Superior Court of Ontario. So that's how good they were. Yeah.
mm,
One of him was Russell Rakes, who actually is credited with starting one of the largest, well, I don't know if it's the largest, but one of the central um, class actions for the Indigenous students at the residential schools. And I think he had 80,000 class members
wow.
in that lawsuit. Like, can you imagine? Yeah. And they settled very soon. Like ours went through 16 years because we, first of all, were not, uh, we had to fight really hard to get recognized that, we were actually abused, etc. And we were such a small school. Um, and we ended up going to trial. But the Indigenous cases did not go to trial. They settled because it was so egregious and it was so obvious that they needed and deserved compensation.
I mean, well, the residential schools though, I mean, they existed. I don't know when they started, but
At least 100
after,
years. Yeah.
after reconciliation, I think is when it might have happened a little bit quick. But there's generations of
Hmm.
residential school survivors that had nothing, right?
Oh,
We're
right. I
talking
mean, it's
once there was
they,
reconciliation, and I think we're talking
yeah,
about that, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So, would you mind doing a little bit of a reading for us?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I would. Loved that. I thought, there's so many really emotional parts in the book that I thought, let's just do the prologue, and it's not too hard to read, and it's not very long. Let's see. It's 3 pages, almost 3 pages.
Okay.
So yeah, prologue, my turn. I hurried along the streets of downtown Toronto, feeling nauseous as I tried to keep pace with Jacqueline and Lisa. Are we really doing this? I could barely comprehend our audacity. Shivering, I looked up at the cloudy sky, typical for a Canadian November day. The skyscrapers reached toward the heavens as if mocking my insignificance. My mind filled with doubt as I walked. The city was so overwhelming and unfamiliar to me. Am I on a fool's errand? Or is this actually God's will? That last question caught me off balance. I had been so trained to consider God's will for everything that I had trouble knowing where my own began. This, among many things, was a work in progress. After all, I'd only been out of the cult for 7 years. Just breathe, Beth. You've got this. I inhaled deeply and took it all in: the city, the emotions, the looming meeting, and the uncertain outcome. We found the imposing high rise office building on Bay Street. In the lobby, we met two other representative plaintiffs, Tim and Richard. My stomach was doing backflips. This is really happening. As the elevator lifted us toward the 18th floor, I could tell that the others were just as nervous. This was uncharted territory, to put it mildly. We were about to present our case to the Ontario Class Proceedings Committee. If successful, they would agree to cover litigation costs should we lose in court. Without this backing, there was no way we could shoulder the burden of pursuing a sorry, of pursuing a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit. Only 5 plaintiffs had been selected to represent a class of nearly 1,400 members. It was too great a risk for all involved. As usual, I was full of doubts and fears. Only now my thoughts seemed to be broadcasting on loudspeakers. Who do you think you are? Launching a class action lawsuit? Grenville wasn't that bad. And they aren't going to listen to someone who looks like you. Why haven't you lost all the baby weight yet? I struggled to focus on the matter at hand. Stuffing, stuffing down my self-doubt was a futile, full-time job, like shoving Hydra's 9 writhing heads into a box. Outside the elevators, we met our lawyers. Taking the lead that day was Loretta Merritt, a partner at her firm, whose serious eyes twinkled whenever justice was served. I was grateful for her kind, reassuring demeanor. She explained the proceedings to us and checked to see if we had prepared statements. 3 of us had, including me. My stomach churned again. Even though I was ready on paper, I didn't feel that way at all inside. We entered an impressive boardroom. The huge oval table was surrounded by large, expensive leather office chairs. Soon, the 5 committee members entered, all of whom had been appointed by the Attorney General and the Law Foundation of Ontario. To say I was intimidated was the understatement of the year. I coached myself to breathe through my rising panic. Our lawyers know what they're doing. They wouldn't be here if they didn't think we had a good case. Russell Rakes, in particular, had represented thousands of Indigenous residential school survivors in the Cloud class action. We were in good hands. Introductions were made. I struggled to hear what was being said over the noise of my pounding heart and blood rushing in my ears. Before I knew it, the time had come for Loretta to present our case. I'm glad she's going first, I thought, as all eyes turned towards our lawyer. She looked poised and self-assured, so I resolved to adopt some of her confidence. But as soon as Loretta started to tell our story, I burst into tears. Not subtle, quiet tears, but an eruption like a volcano, taking me completely by surprise. Emotions that had fermented from being bottled up for 38 years burst forth in an ugly cry that couldn't be silenced. Using my new burgundy blouse to mop my face, I tried desperately to pull myself together. The last thing I wanted to do was distract anyone from our lawyer's opening remarks. It would be years before I understood my emotional response. All I knew at the time was that the minute I heard a lawyer speaking on our behalf, it was like a dam broke. I'd been holding a massive reservoir of pain for so long, and the magnitude of the moment was more than I could hold. Finally, we're being heard. We're being taken seriously. For some reason, there was no Kleenex boxes in the boardroom. There were no, sorry. For some reason, there were no Kleenex boxes in that boardroom. I vaguely recall several lawyers searching in their briefcases for one, before one woman graciously handed me a crumpled tissue. Gradually, my sobs stopped, but tears still streamed silently down my cheeks. I was scheduled to speak to the group after Loretta. When she finished, she turned to me and whispered, "You don't have to. It's okay." I shook my head, rubbing my face with my palms. No, I want to. I have to. With that, I unfolded my notes, took a shuddering breath, and apologized for my outburst. The members of the committee nodded in understanding and encouragement. After another deep breath, I began. It was finally my turn to speak.
Oh, thank you, Beth.
That's the end of the prologue.
Uh, we're being taken seriously. We're being heard. It was
Hmm.
my turn to speak. That was very emotional. Um,
Thanks.
so the North Grenville Writers Circle is primarily a learning group. Um, so can you talk about maybe some advice you might have for somebody who wants to write a memoir?
Wow. Well, let's see. You know, there's so much that I learned. I mean, honestly, it's been one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also one of the most transformative and healing things. And also, I I don't regret any of the difficulty. You know what I mean? It's so rewarding. It's another one. So if you, I guess number one is follow your intuition. If you feel like something's nagging you that you just can't stop thinking that you should write, then you should. Like you've got to follow your intuition. And I would say it's a really long process. So just think in years, not in months. You know what I mean? Like you, for me, it took 2 years and I was off work to write. I basically wrote 1 hour a day, maybe two. That's all I could handle. It's also very emotional. So if you had trauma and you're writing about that sort of thing, um, some people say don't write until you're really well and truly healed. For me, I had had a lot of therapy, but the writing actually did the healing. So I think it's different for everyone, but do expect it will be emotional, and you need to have a good, solid support network, you know. And then what else? I mean, another thing is I learned a lot, in terms of, there were all the decisions to be made of if I was going to change names, if I was going to uh, how I could remember things specifically. So I often contacted people to help me remember, how did this work or how did that work? But they were historic documents that I was able to access, like yearbooks and court records and my own journals. So that helped. But I guess where I'm going with this is in my case, I had to consult lawyers because I didn't want to have any problems with a defamation um, lawsuit because I was talking about a cult or a community, Christian community that's still in operation. So, and it's actually very kind of risky for cult members to write about their former cults because many cults are incredibly litigious and don't want truth being told. So that added another layer of uh, due diligence on my part. And I also had the sense that because my story was not my own, not just my own, I wanted it to be put out with the best and most experienced people helping me through the journey. So I either could self-publish as one end and then traditional publish as the other. I tried the traditional route because I didn't want to spend as much money as the other way could be. But I learned very quickly that, especially with memoir, it's really, really hard to get a traditional publishing deal unless you are really famous or you have a huge platform. So the rule of thumb was at least 20,000 followers, like on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, TikTok. And even then, you'd have to convince a lot of people in the publishing industry that your story mattered. And so I didn't have anywhere near that. So my decision had to be either self-publishing or hybrid publishing. And I went with hybrid because I wanted a good publishing a publisher who had excellent um, uh, expertise, and so that's another thing you have a lot. It's a big learning curve to figure out which publishers to pitch to, because not all hybrid presses are the same. And so, yeah, it took me about 2.5 years to publish it, and to find my way. I almost went with I had to pitch to these publishers. They don't just take anyone. And then I had to figure out, I decided in all fairness, it costs a lot, right? So I decided to use the money that I'll be getting from the lawsuit towards publishing my book, and that's how I decided I could afford it. So, yeah, it's like, you know, I win this money to tell the story, and I felt it was money well spent, you know. So I don't know if that gives people enough. We could probably talk about that all day.
Yeah, no, and I took so pacing because you got to do self-care along with when you're writing.
Oh, yes.
Excuse me. Making sure that you have the support that you need to get it done.
Hmm.
And it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
It's a marathon.
Something.
It feels more like climbing Mount Everest, to be honest.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. So before we go, would you mind telling our viewers what's next in your writing journey? Do you have any upcoming appearances or events?
Oh yeah. Well, that's a great question. For number one, the audiobook is almost ready. It's been uploaded to the distributors, and right now it's in review. So they tell me it'll be about another week or so. So I'm excited that that's almost out.
Is
I
that in your
actually,
voice? Is that your
yes, I
Oh,
narrated it in a studio in Ottawa, and that was a whole learning curve too as well to get the editing and find the right people to produce it. So it's almost out, and I'm really looking forward to that being out. Um, yeah, so the next I don't know when you're going to put this out, but I have a series of upcoming book events, and if people are interested, I think the best way to find that out is to find me on Facebook at Beth Granger author, and I will be posting. I continue to post what's coming up. I have a signing in Smiths Falls on, I think it's called National Indie Book Day or International Indie Bookstore, Indie
sixth,
Bookstore Day.
6th of August, I think. I don't know
It's
if I'm
April. It's April 26th is
Mhm.
the that. So that's just like around the corner. But yeah, I've had and like I won't list them all because I've got like six or seven upcoming events. But
We'll
if you
find
want
out
to
again.
come see me, I've got them. I'll just say Smiths Falls, Gananoque, Almont, Ottawa at the Indigo. I'll be in Montreal, Toronto, Indigo. So those are coming up, and it's all very exciting. And I keep coming up with more events. Each week something keeps popping up because I keep hearing from more libraries and uh, different people. Oh, You know what I really love is I've been to some book clubs, and I just love talking to people who have read the book and have tons of questions. It's really exciting. So
Hmm.
yeah, look for me at Beth Granger author on Facebook, or my website is bethgranger.ca,
Perfect.
and you can contact me through the contact form.
Okay, and even maybe some of the North Grenville Writer Circle people who want to do a memoir, could they contact you?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to hear from them. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Beth. For our local viewers, Born and Raised, Surviving the Cult Was Only Half the Battle can be found at the North Grenville Public Library.
Mhm.
And the memoir is also available, of course, on Kobo and Amazon. Thanks to everyone who is watching, and bye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth.